Today, we're looking at a solution that is, it's almost hiding in plain sight. It's like discovering that the biggest, most expensive tool in your shed, which you bought for one specific job, is actually perfect for the next massive job.
And you've already paid for it.
And you've already paid for it.
That analogy is perfect because our mission today is to explore exactly that scenario. We dove into a whole stack of critical sources, articles, technical papers, policy reports, and they all seem to be pointing to this one incredible idea.
Right. That the energy we need to stabilize the world's power grids isn't some far-off science fiction invention.
No, it's the pervasive heat, deep underground geothermal energy. And here's the really unexpected twist. It's being unlocked and scaled by the unmatched subsurface expertise of the very industry it's supposed to replace.
Oil and gas?
Oil and gas.
And what makes this moment so critical is the urgency.
Right.
It's just palpable. We're tracking what you can really only describe as an exponential sprint. It's being led by individuals who feel like they're genuinely racing against the clock.
And one name kept coming up again and again. Jamie Beard.
Chief among them. The narrative is so clear here. This isn't just about finding another clean energy source. It's about mobilizing the specialized knowledge, the capital, and, frankly, the execution speed of the hydrocarbon sector to create reliable, constant power.
And potentially.
And
everywhere on Earth.
everywhere.
So, okay, let's define the core problem here that geothermal is so uniquely positioned to solve. I mean, everyone accepts that solar and wind are essential. They're fantastic. They're getting cheaper every year.
Absolutely. No one's denying that.
Yeah.
But they have an inherent flaw.
They're intermittent. The sun doesn't always shine. The wind doesn't always blow. And that means they can't provide what the grid really truly needs.
Which is reliable, 247 baseload power.
Exactly. And maybe we should break down what baseload actually means for you listening.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Baseload is simply the minimum amount of electricity needed to keep everything running. The lights on, factories operating during any given period. It has to be constant, predictable, and always on.
And when you have a gap in that baseload power, what happens?
Well, you have to turn to something else. Either you rely on storage, which usually means very expensive batteries, or you fire up what are called fossil fuel peaker plants.
Right, so geothermal steps in as this potential game changer. It offers constant emissions-free energy and, this is the crucial part, it has the high power density and the scalability that traditionally only belong to things like fossil fuels or nuclear.
And experts from the University of Texas at Austin really hammer this point home. They classify geothermal as firm or baseload. It's always on. And unlike solar or wind, you don't need these massive grid-scale battery farms to make it work, which just adds, so much complexity and cost to those other sources.
Okay, so if it's so great, where are we now? What's the current scale?
Well, right now, the U.S. geothermal footprint it's tiny. Last year, it accounted for about 4 gigawatts of capacity. That's only 0.4% of the total U.S. capacity.
4 gigawatts. Is that a lot?
Yeah.
I mean, put that in perspective for us.
It's enough to power roughly 800,000 Texas homes, which sounds impressive.
It does.
But then you zoom out and look at the scale of the entire national grid, and you realize it's just a drop in the bucket.
But the projected future, this is where it gets wild. And this isn't just hype. This is supported by some really deep federal analysis.
Right. The Department of Energy projects that U.S. geothermal power capacity could grow to a staggering 90 gigawatts by 2050.
90. Okay, let's pause on that number for a second. What does 90 gigawatts actually mean?
It means enough energy to power the entire Texas grid during a peak summer day.
The entire Texas grid, from basically a tiny fraction today. That kind of growth, it shifts geothermal from this niche resource you only find near, like, hot springs in Iceland,
To a major national energy player, a contender.
And that brings us to what you were calling the Texas paradox.
Yes. Texas is sitting on this immense, completely untapped geothermal heat resource. We're talking an estimated 1 million exajoules of heat just in the upper 10 kilometers of the ground.
Which is a number so big it's almost meaningless.
It's roughly 1 million times the state's annual electricity needs. So the heat is there. And the people who know how to drill for it, they're definitely there.
And yet, as of 2025, Texas has precisely 0 utility-scale operational geothermal power plants.
0. It's this land of massive subsurface potential and world-class drilling expertise, but no actual geothermal production running at scale.
And that absence, that's the whole reason Texas has become what our sources call an early hotspot for exploration and innovation, isn't it?
It's exactly why. The state has the resources, both underground and, the human capital, and it has this desperate need for grid stability.
Especially after Winter Storm Uri.
Absolutely. That was a wake-up call. The legislative tide is turning fast, driven by those failures. But that gap, between 0 operational plants today and hitting that 90-gigawatt future, that's what requires this immediate, accelerated, almost frantic effort.
So the mission for you, the learner, is to understand this exponential sprint that's happening right now. It's being spearheaded by companies and nonprofits that are leveraging Texas's most unique asset: its deep subsurface expertise and its oil and gas workforce. It is a race against time.
A race with very, very high stakes. And that race is what makes the personal story behind this whole movement so compelling. It really provides the motivation needed to overcome decades of skepticism and inertia.
Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. Geothermal has been around for, well, forever. The first plant was in Italy in 1913. The U.S. opened the geysers in California back in 1960.
It's not a new idea.
Not at all. So if the resource is so massive and the tech is so compatible with drilling, why is this sprint happening now?
That's the key question. And the answer seems to be this unique blend of technological advancement and a really profound sense of personal urgency. And that's all embodied by Jamie Beard.
Her story is fascinating. She started as an activist, right? Working completely outside the system.
Totally. From the age of 10, she was drawn to environmental protection, really galvanized by the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. She said she realized early on that environmental problems were something we did not want.
And that passion led her to environmental law.
It did, but she described it as, hitting a wall. She recognized that trying to change this massive entrenched system from the outside it wasn't working fast enough. For huge global change, she needed to find a lever inside the energy sector, not just protest against it.
And then came the light bulb moment.
Yes, from academic research of all places. Specifically, a 2006 report from an MIT professor, Jefferson Tester, on geothermal potential. And Tester's insight, it wasn't about some new engine or a new turbine. It was about connecting 2 industrial workflows that had always been seen as separate.
Hydrocarbons and geothermal.
Exactly. He noted that the technology needed to advance, sure, but it wasn't a total reinvention. Because geothermal is, and this is his quote, so compatible with what we do with hydrocarbon extraction. In both cases, you drill holes, you manage complex fluids deep underground, and you bring them to the surface. It's the same core skill set.
And the sources also detail this profound personal clock that's ticking behind her focus. This is really crucial context, I think, for understanding the urgency of her 2030 deadline.
It is. It's deeply personal. Her young son was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that limited his life expectancy, and a journalist profiling her described this moment as her facing an existential choice.
You either let that personal doom just consume you,
or you transform that grief and that anxiety into this radical focus on changing the world with, just unparalleled speed.
And that urgency became Project Innerspace.
It crystallized into Project Innerspace. And this isn't a traditional energy company. It's a nonprofit organization, and it's dedicated to one thing: achieving the global exponential growth of geothermal by 2030.
That deadline is not arbitrary.
Not at all. It's driven by climate needs, yes, but also by her personal time frame. And their model is to pair the financial resources of climate-conscious donors with the deep technical expertise and infrastructure of the oil and gas industry.
That is a huge timeline. 6 years from now to achieve exponential global growth. How is Project Innerspace even attacking a problem that big?
They have a very clear 2-phased approach. Phase 1, which they launched in 2022, is all about reducing the risk for investors by giving them data. They're planning to publish an interactive global geothermal resources map this year in 2024.
So it's a treasure map.
It's basically a treasure map, a high-level guide for where the resource is most accessible all over the world.
And Phase 2 is the acceleration part. The GeoFund.
Exactly. The GeoFund will deploy teams of innovators and capital to build the first-of-a-kind geothermal pilot projects. And crucially, they're prioritizing these projects in parts of the world that desperately need firm, reliable power.
Places experiencing energy poverty.
Right, and the expected top population centers in 2050. This is about making sure the deployment is equitable from the very start, not just, optimizing for the easiest places to drill in rich countries.
Okay, let's talk about the human asset. Because the whole success of this project really hinges on converting these industry veterans.
It does. Beard realized that the ONG experts are an unmatched subsurface expertise and a huge asset for climate change. But this required convincing them to shift their entire professional identity.
So how did she do that?
She started by reaching out to the veterans, the ones who had retired or were semi-retired, maybe playing a lot of golf.
And maybe feeling a little pressure from their kids or grandkids about their industry's impact.
I think that's a big part of it. The sources describe her seeking out the people who built entire careers managing multi-billion-dollar drilling projects, the real titans of the industry.
And that talent transfer, it's already happening.
Yeah.
It's measurable.
Oh, yeah. We see scores of former oil industry workers and executives moving into these geothermal startups. Fervo Energy, one of the leaders we'll discuss in a minute, reports that roughly 60% of its 80 employees come directly from oil and gas.
They're hiring the people who know how to drill 15,000 feet down in 20 days.
You can't just teach that. You need decades of experience. And the anecdotal evidence really brings it to life. I mean, you look at Cindy Taft, the CEO of Sage Geosystems. She spent 36 years at Shell, managing teams with annual budgets around $1 billion, made it all the way to vice president.
She was skeptical at first, I read.
Very skeptical. But Beard convinced her to join the movement in 2020. And it's the same story with Lance Cook, who also retired from Shell as a VP. He's now the chief technology officer at Sage.
I think the most telling detail for me was Beard's description of the initial reaction she got from these veterans.
What was that?
It was typically, it'll never work, just dismissive. But then a few weeks later, they'd call her back.
Because they couldn't stop thinking about it.
Exactly. They couldn't stop thinking about it. They were convinced when they saw this opportunity for massive, tangible impact, a chance to apply their immense skills to a new, high-growth, globally necessary mission.
And that move is driven by some serious economic logic, too, not just, altruism. Both industries require the exact same core capability.
Detailed understanding of geology, advanced drilling, well completion.
And managing the flow of fluids, whether it's water or oil out of the ground. Transferring that know-how and the existing technology alone is estimated to reduce the overall capital cost of geothermal development by a staggering amount.
Okay. Give me the numbers on that cost reduction.
It's estimated to reduce the cost by 20 to 43%, depending on the specific type of geothermal tech you're using.
Wow.
I mean, think about that. You're almost halving the cost just by using existing skills and slightly modified existing equipment.
That's completely transformative.
Yeah.
It means the technology becomes viable so much faster, which just accelerates that 2030 sprint.
And a professor of engineering at Texas A&M noted that performance isn't just about what new tech you use, but how you use it. This isn't just technology transfer, it's a critical rate of knowledge transfer.
And if we scale that knowledge and that execution speed up to the industrial level of Texas oil and gas, the potential is just mind-boggling.
It is. The O&G industry in Texas drills around 15,000 wells every year. 15,000. If geothermal could match that staggering drilling rate, and those wells were properly configured for heat extraction,
What does that mean?
it would take roughly 4 years to produce the energy equivalent of all the oil and gas currently used for electricity and heat in the entire state of Texas.
Wait. 4 years? That sounds too simple. Is that an apples-to-apples comparison?
It's a fair question.
Does that 4-year metric factor in the enormous lead time you need to build transmission lines, secure water rights, and deal with all the permitting to turn that heat into actual power on the grid?
It's not apples to apples in terms of fully deployed integrated power. You're absolutely right that transmission and permitting are huge bottlenecks we need to talk about later. But what that 4-year metric does prove is that the raw geological subsurface resource base is vast enough and the drilling expertise is efficient enough to hit that massive scale quickly.
If the external infrastructure and the regulatory framework can keep pace.
That's the tension. The oil and gas industry isn't just a source of capital anymore. It's the source of the necessary expertise and execution speed for this global sprint. But the rest of the system has to catch up.
Okay, this is where the technology gets really, really interesting. Because this isn't your grandfather's geothermal, the kind that relied on finding these natural hydrothermal spots marked by hot springs and volcanoes.
Right. Thanks to this brain trust transfer, we are seeing 3 distinct technological approaches emerge. And all of them use oil field techniques as a foundation to open up geothermal literally anywhere.
And it's fascinating that all 3 of these approaches, enhanced geothermal, pressure geothermal, and ultra-deep drilling, are all being spearheaded by Houston-based companies.
Led by O&G veterans. Texas is providing the human capital and the technical ecosystem for this entire revolution.
So let's start with Enhanced Geothermal Systems, or EGS. This seems to be the most mature of these next-gen technologies. And this is where Fervo Energy, led by Tim Latimer, had its big breakthrough.
EGS is what fundamentally breaks the geographic limitations of geothermal. Conventional power needs three things: heat, natural fluid, and natural fractures in the rock for permeability. EGS removes the need for those natural fractures.
It creates them artificially.
It creates artificial reservoirs deep underground. It does this by injecting high-pressure fluid, and yes, this is similar to hydraulic fracturing, to open up cracks in hot, dry rock where no natural fractures existed before.
So you're basically manufacturing the permeability you need to circulate water and pull the heat out.
Precisely. And this effectively expands the available resource from just a handful of geological hotspots to, well, to virtually the entire shallow continental crust of the planet.
And Tim Latimer, Fervo's CEO, he came directly from the shale revolution, didn't he?
He did, and he realized that the directional drilling and the fracking techniques he was working on were a huge opportunity for tech transfer to solve this EGS permeability problem.
So how does Fervo's drilling approach actually work? How is it different from a traditional shale well?
It's modeled on shale, but with a twist. They drill vertically down, and then they steer the drill horizontally, sometimes for miles, right through the hot rock. That's directional drilling. But here is the critical difference.
Okay.
In shale, you're using fracking to get hydrocarbons out of the rock. In EGS, you're using fracking to create cracks that connect two separate wells. You're creating an artificial closed-loop radiator system deep underground.
A closed-loop radiator. That's a great analogy. So water goes down one well, flows through those new cracks, gets superheated by the rock, and then comes back up a second well to power a turbine.
Exactly. And the results from their Cape Station project in Utah prove that applying this O&G manufacturing mentality absolutely works.
What were those results?
Back in February of 2024, Fervo published their early drilling results, and they showed they achieved a 70% year-over-year reduction in drilling time. They drilled their fastest well in just 21 days.
70%. That is a dramatic acceleration.
It's a step change, and that speed translates directly to viability. Speed is the enemy of high cost in the drilling world.
And so what did that do to the price tag?
Drilling costs across their first 4 horizontal wells at Cape fell from $9.4 million to $4.8 million per well.
Wow, they cut it in half. How?
By applying modern O&G equipment. They use things like polycrystalline diamond compact or PDC drill bits. These are not your standard bits. They're diamond-tipped, ultra-hard composites that are typically used in the toughest shale basins to just chew through granite and hard rock quickly.
Yeah. And they had to deal with the heat, right?
Right. They also used mud coolers to counteract the extremely high subsurface temperatures that previously forced geothermal rigs to constantly stop and cool down. This is what signals that the technology is ready for commercialization.
And it is. Fervo's flagship 500-megawatt Cape Station is backed by huge players like Google and Devon Energy and is contracted to deliver electricity to the grid in 2026. This is the EGS model, working at commercial scale.
It is. Now, if Fervo solved the speed and the geographical availability problem, the next question is grid stability. And that brings us to the second approach, pressure geothermal, championed by Cindy Taft and Sage Geosystems.
And their vision is revolutionary because it goes beyond just generating constant power. They're looking at power generation and long-duration energy storage.
That makes them a hybrid solution. They're tackling two of the grid's biggest headaches, clean power and storage, all within the same subsurface framework.
And their tech is called EarthStore. How does that work?
So Sage focuses on using the mechanical energy from the earth pressure in a single well system. This is a major contrast to the two-well system that Fervo uses for heat exchange.
Okay, we have to clarify that. If Fervo uses 2 wells to circulate water and capture heat, how does Sage's single well manage to both store and release energy?
It's all about rock mechanics and pressure management. Sage injects huge volumes of water into the subsurface at very high pressure, and this stores energy mechanically like you're stretching a massive invisible rubber band underground.
And then when the grid needs power?
When the grid needs power, say late in the afternoon when solar production drops off, they release that pressure. The pressurized water just gushes back up the same, well, spinning small turbines to generate electricity.
So they can charge and discharge energy for long durations.
Exactly. 8 or more hours, potentially even multi-day timescales. It makes it ideal for managing that variability on the grid from renewables.
And this isn't just theoretical. They proved this concept in Texas.
They did. We have this perfect example from their Starr County pilot. In 2021, Sage leased an old Shell dry hole, a well that Shell had drilled and abandoned back in 2009 looking for gas.
Sort of failed asset.
A completely failed asset. Then, in March of 2023, the Sage crew pumped 20,000 barrels of water into that 2-mile deep well. Hours later, they released the pressure, the water gushed back up, and it spun their turbines to generate electricity.
That not only demonstrates a path toward long-duration storage and abundant hot, dry rock, but it also just it underscores this powerful narrative of asset reuse, taking a sunk cost, a failed O&G asset, and turning it into a storage solution for the future grid.
And finally, let's talk about the most radical approach of all, ultra-deep drilling, which is being spearheaded by Fervo Energy. This is where the technological limits of traditional O&G drilling become the core problem they're trying to solve.
And what is that limitation specifically?
It's all about heat. Traditional oil and gas equipment, the electronics, the mechanical drill bits themselves, they typically begin to fail when temperatures get to around 400 degrees Fahrenheit.
So they just can't go any deeper.
The drill bits wear out incredibly quickly in hard rock, and it just becomes uneconomical. If you can't go deeper than a few kilometers, you can't access the hottest, most powerful resources the Earth has to offer.
So Quays, led by Henry Fan, who's an alum of Schlumberger, they're just ignoring the mechanical limits entirely.
That's their goal. Quays's radical solution is to use millimeter waves. To make this relatable, you can think of these as super high-frequency microwaves. It's a technology that was actually derived from fusion research.
And they use this to, what, melt the rock?
To vaporize it. They use this intense energy to literally vaporize the rock, boring a hole not with a spinning metal bit, but with pure energy. It's like taking the concept of an industrial laser cutter and scaling it up to bore through the hardest rock on Earth.
That completely bypasses the limitations of mechanical drilling. What's the goal in terms of depth and temperature?
Their goal is just mind-boggling. They want to drill up to 20 kilometers deep to reach super hot temperatures up to 500 degrees Celsius.
500 C. At that temperature, what happens?
At those extreme temperatures, the geothermal resource is so universally powerful that Quays believes the steam produced can be fed directly into existing fossil-fired infrastructure. They could theoretically convert a retiring gas or coal power plant into a geothermal plant with minimal modification to the surface equipment.
That is the ultimate dual use case. It would dramatically accelerate the retirement of fossil fuels by reusing their most expensive physical assets. And what's their timeline?
They aim to drill into 300 to 500 degree rock by 2026 and have their first super hot power plant online by 2028.
And being able to access that super hot rock, that's what makes deep geothermal a truly universal source of energy, right?
It is. It provides energy independence globally and unlocks this massive power density because that resource exists almost everywhere on Earth, just much deeper and hotter than in the shallow crust. And the Department of Energy is keenly focused on this, funding pilot projects aimed at demonstrating superhot EGS at temperatures above 375 Celsius, which aligns perfectly with Quays's aggressive vision.
So we've talked about the tech, but technological innovation is only half the battle. The other half is policy and regulation. And the sources show this really significant and, frankly, necessary regulatory shift, especially in Texas.
Right. They're positioning geothermal not as some fringe energy source, but as a cornerstone for grid reliability.
And that political support is absolutely critical because the strategic value of geothermal is undeniable. It provides constant, around-the-clock output.
The numbers are incredible. Conventional geothermal capacity factors average around 92%. That consistently surpasses coal and natural gas capacity factors. It's approaching the reliability of nuclear power.
That 92% capacity factor is huge. It means it is a truly dispatchable power source.
Can you explain what dispatchable means?
It means grid operators can rely on it to be turned on whenever it's needed to meet those minimum power demands, the baseload. And after the widespread blackouts we saw during Winter Storm Erie, this capability is absolutely critical for stabilizing Texas's ERCOT grid.
And for balancing their decarbonization efforts at the same time.
Exactly. So recognizing this, the Texas legislature acted pretty decisively in the 2025 session. This led to some key legislative victories that clarified geothermal's financial and regulatory position.
And this policy de-risking is what allows companies to even start planning that $20 to $25 billion investment that's required globally by 2030.
Okay, let's break down the policy wins. The major victory was a bill called SB 1762. Tell us why this was so crucial for developers.
SB 1762 provided critical clarification within something called the Texas Energy Fund, or the TF. Now, the TF is essentially the state's massive infrastructure bank. It was designed to fund new dispatchable power generation to prevent future grid failures.
And before this bill, geothermal's place was
It
ambiguous.
was. SB 1762 ensures that geothermal energy officially qualifies as a dispatchable resource under the TEEF guidelines.
And even more importantly, it makes it clear that geothermal-based energy storage like Sage's EarthStore system is distinct from standard battery storage.
Which was previously excluded from TEEF funding. That distinction removes all the regulatory uncertainty. It allows geothermal projects to be fully recognized as firm generation assets. The statute formally defines these wells as being used for the retention of energy that may be used to provide a dispatchable generation of electricity.
So the policy framework is finally meeting the technology where it is.
Exactly. And then you have HB 3778, which expanded the TEEF to explicitly support geothermal generation or conservation facilities of 10 megawatts or greater. That just expands the pool of projects that are eligible for state support.
And there was another one, HB 4370, that affects cities and towns, right?
Yeah, that one is also significant. It allows these geothermal energy networks, or 10Ns, which provide heating and cooling to local districts, to be financed with public bonds. This basically gives geothermal infrastructure the same status as traditional public works, like water or sewer systems.
It really opens the door for major public-private partnerships. And the financial incentives, they seem designed to enforce speed, to support Jamie Beer's 2030 sprint mentality.
Oh, they absolutely are. The TFF completion bonus program is still active, and it offers developers a substantial financial reward. $120,000 per megawatt for projects that get interconnected before June 1st, 2026.
That's a huge short-term incentive for rapid deployment. It forces developers to move fast to get that state capital.
And this state policy alignment is perfectly mirrored at the federal level, which really shows that geothermal is a bipartisan priority.
The federal government is all in.
Totally. The DOE is supporting EGS through its enhanced geothermal shot analysis, which aims to cut the cost of EGS by 90% by 2035. And crucially, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, provided significant initial funding.
How much are we talking?
The first round was up to $60 million, and it was directed at 3 key pilot projects to demonstrate EGS in diverse geological settings.
And those pilots include Fervo Energy in Utah.
Fifron New Energies in California and Mazama Energy in Oregon. And that Oregon project is demonstrating super hot EGS at temperatures above 375 degrees Celsius, showing the DOE is actively trying to de-risk the future vision that companies like Quasar have.
They're also trying to speed up the bureaucracy.
Yes, they're attacking that bottleneck. The federal government is pushing to streamline the famously slow permitting for geothermal development on federal lands. They're aiming for environmental assessments, a key regulatory step, to be done within a shockingly fast 14 days for important projects.
That speed is essential to keep pace with the technology. But even with all this support, the financial hurdle is still significant.
It is. EGS is very capital intensive. Drilling and well completion costs alone can be 50% or more of the total project cost.
Which brings us right back to where we started.
Full circle. This is why those efficiency gains from the ONG know-how, that 20 to 43% cost reduction we mentioned, are so absolutely critical. Geothermal has to prove it can compete on cost against these deeply entrenched energy sources, and it just can't do that without leveraging that subsurface expertise.
So it's not just about the specialized knowledge or the policy, it's about leveraging physical assets. Our sources highlight this massive existing asset inventory that can be repurposed.
Millions of dollars worth of infrastructure, from old wells to entire power plants originally built for oil and gas.
This truly is the ultimate form of resource stewardship, isn't it? It just reduces the overall capital needed for the transition.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the asset inventory. The U.S. has millions of idle, dry, or unproductive ONG wells. The historical count is about 3.7 million wells, and these represent massive, sunk capital investment.
And they also represent something even more valuable than just the metal casings themselves.
The data.
The data.
Exactly. They hold existing subsurface data, detailed temperature profiles, rock properties, seismic history, all of which significantly cut down on geothermal development costs and risks. Developers don't have to drill expensive exploratory wells from scratch. They can start with the data that's already there.
One of the most immediate applications of this is something called co-production. Can you explain how that works in active oil fields?
Sure. Co-production is when you harvest the geothermal fluid, which is often just very hot water that gets extracted alongside hydrocarbons in an active O&G site. The water that comes up with the oil is often hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit.
And normally that's just a waste product.
It's expensive waste that needs to be disposed of, but with co-production, that waste heat can be converted into electricity. That reduces the on-site power costs for the drilling operation and cuts down on the expense of water disposal. You're turning a problem into a profit center.
And the Department of Energy's Wells of Opportunity, the WOO program, is targeting this direct reuse. What are some of the pilot examples from that?
Well, there's the Geothermix project in Texas, which is trying to harvest waste heat from Austin chalk wells using these novel thermoelectric cells to generate commercial amounts of electricity. They're using heat that was previously just vented or managed as a nuisance.
And there's a thermal application example in Oklahoma that was so practical.
Yeah, that one is great. A co-production project is using heat from an oil field to warm the Tuttle Elementary and Middle Schools. With 4 hydrocarbon wells located within a mile, the schools get to recycle O&G infrastructure at a huge cost savings. It just demonstrates the potential for these local decentralized heating systems.
Beyond the wells themselves, there's also substantial infrastructure reuse potential.
A ton. Idled O&G drilling rigs, which, their use fluctuates wildly with market conditions, can be directly repurposed for geothermal projects. Now, geothermal often requires some specialized equipment because of the greater depths and hotter rock.
Like the PDC bits and mud coolers we talked about.
Right. But the basic steel and mechanics of the rigs are completely transferable.
And crucially, the surface infrastructure is also reusable.
Yes. Retiring gas and coal plants offer existing power plant infrastructure, massive turbines, cooling systems. Geothermal generation, especially that super hot variety that Kwasi is chasing, uses very similar steam cycle equipment and a similar skilled workforce. They can plug right into existing manufacturing and maintenance supply chains immediately.
Okay, we have to talk about the environmental challenges. This transition isn't without its trade-offs. We need to be clear-eyed about this, particularly water usage and induced seismicity.
Water usage is a major point of criticism, and for good reason. Geothermal plants can require between 1,700 and 4,000 gallons of water per megawatt hour. That's a lot, especially in water-scarce regions like Texas.
So how do they manage that?
Modern closed-loop facilities manage this by using the geothermal fluid itself instead of fresh water for cooling, and critically, by re-injecting the wastewater back into the reservoir after the heat is captured.
And that re-injection is also key for physical stability, right? To prevent the ground from sinking.
Absolutely. Re-injection is crucial for preventing what's called land subsidence. By maintaining the pressure underground, you stabilize the geology.
What about air emissions? Since we're talking about baseload power, we really need to compare it to the existing baseload sources like coal and natural gas.
Geothermal is low carbon, but it's not perfectly zero carbon. The emissions really vary based on the system design. Closed-loop systems, like the ones Fervo and Sage are using, have minimal air emissions because any gases that come out of the well are just injected right back into the ground.
But open-loop systems, where the steam directly hits the turbine, they still release some gases.
They do. They emit gases like hydrogen sulfide, CO2, and methane. However, to put it in perspective, the sulfur dioxide emissions from geothermal plants are about 30 times lower per megawatt hour than from coal plants. The life cycle emissions for EGS are estimated at around 0.2 pounds of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour.
Which is way lower than natural gas or coal.
Substantially lower. Natural gas is 0.6 to 2 pounds, and coal is 1.4 to 3.6. So it's a much, much cleaner alternative, even with some slight emissions.
Okay, let's get to the critical concern, especially in the context of transferring O&G tech. Induced seismicity or human-caused earthquakes, particularly because EGS relies on high-pressure fracturing.
This is a widely studied and acknowledged risk. It's associated with both conventional geothermal and specifically EGS because of the fluid injection and pressure changes. And it has caused significant issues in the past.
Like where?
A pilot plant in Basel, Switzerland caused a magnitude 3.4 quake back in 2006, and a project in South Korea caused a magnitude 5.5 quake in 2017, which injured dozens of people. So the key takeaway is that the risk is very real, but it is manageable with modern techniques.
So how is this actively managed when you're trying to scale up so quickly to meet that 2030 deadline?
Mitigation is paramount, and it involves 3 primary interlocking strategies. First is meticulous site selection. You move projects away from major known fault lines. Second, you use constant real-time microseismic monitoring.
And this is where the O&G expertise is vital.
It's essential. You establish this array of sensors to detect even tiny, imperceptible movements in the rock.
And what happens if they detect something?
That triggers the third strategy, pressure management. If microseismic activity increases past a predefined threshold, operations have to be adjusted or paused immediately. And this requires transparent communication with local communities, explaining the thresholds and showing that the company will actively manage pressure to prevent a dangerous event. Active real-time pressure management is the industry standard for risk mitigation today.
This entire deep dive reveals this fundamental shift in what geothermal even is. It's no longer this niche, geographically restricted resource that you only find in places like the geysers in California or in Iceland.
Not at all. Thanks to these next-generation technologies like EGS and Quas's radical drilling, it is transforming into a nearly ubiquitous global energy source.
That's really the democratization of energy.
It is. The heat needed for both electricity generation and thermal energy. For industrial processes, for heating and cooling, it exists virtually everywhere beneath the Earth's surface. Geothermal can be deployed in the hot, dry rock almost anywhere on Earth, often directly next to major population centers.
Which eliminates the need for massive long-distance transmission infrastructure.
Exactly. And the sheer global scaling potential of this ubiquitous resource it's just staggering. A landmark study led by researchers at UT Austin actually put numbers to this idea of scaling geothermal to the level of the O&G industry.
And the findings were what?
The findings are truly staggering. Their analysis showed that drilling 1.4 million wells globally between 2030 and 2050, which is aggressive, but it's technically plausible based on historical O&G execution rates, that could meet 77% of the world's projected electricity demand.
77%. 3/4 of the world's power needs from one clean, reliable, always-on resource.
And it solves the thermal problem, too. We often forget that half the world's energy use is for heating and cooling, not just electricity. The study found that drilling 600,000 wells globally in that same time frame could meet over 100% of the world's projected demand for thermal energy by 2050.
And that kind of universal availability, it translates directly to geopolitical energy security, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Geothermal is a path to energy independence for every nation. It doesn't require fuels that have to be shipped across volatile regions. It produces no waste in closed-loop systems, and it's completely insulated from the geopolitical volatility that affects natural gas or oil prices.
The kind of thing triggered by instability in major producing regions.
Exactly. Geothermal is not just about clean energy. It's about robust baseload reliability delivered at industrial scale by capitalizing on the existing workforce skills and infrastructure in Texas and beyond.
The whole story of geothermal right now is the story of ambition meeting technology and policy alignment. Fervo's commercial contracts, Sage's storage breakthroughs, Quasi's radical vision to vaporize rock.
And the Texas legislature classifying it as dispatchable power. It all demonstrates this unprecedented momentum behind the sprint.
But the success of this ambitious transition, it hinges not just on the technical feasibility that these companies are proving. It hinges on the ability of governments and the private sector to continue de-risking these projects and absorbing the massive upfront capital costs.
The technology is proven, but the commercial model is still being established against these deeply entrenched rivals.
The Federal Department of Energy stated that $20 to $25 billion needs to be invested globally by 2030 just to push geothermal toward widespread commercial use. And given that the industry still has to prove its consistent cost competitiveness, a process that requires years of lead time for things like securing water rights and transmission planning, the question for you, the learner, is this.
Will the pervasive sense of urgency felt by innovators like Jamie Beard, who has this self-imposed 2030 deadline for global exponential growth, be enough to sustain that massive multi-billion-dollar investment required before that deadline?
Or will the speed of policy and capital lag behind the speed of the drill bit? That is the real challenge standing between us and global energy independence.
Something to think about as the drilling speeds continue to accelerate and the policy landscape continues to shift right beneath our feet.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.